Well, hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Benedict Rogers, an interview series produced by Hong Kong Watch. And it's a really great privilege and pleasure to welcome someone who has become a friend of mine and certainly a friend of Hong Kong's over the last year. Someone who perhaps is a little bit different from most of our previous guests who've mostly been Hong Kong activists or international politicians. Winston Marshall is the former banjoist and lead guitarist in the band Mumford Sons, with whom he won multiple awards, including a Grammy and two Brits. And over the last year, Winston has really been a huge support to Hong Kong, and particularly Hong Kongers coming to the UK, founding the charity Hong Kong Link Up. So, Winston, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Ben. The privilege is mine. I'm a great admirer of yours and your work with Hong Kong Watch. So it's a pleasure to talk. I feel like I'm being interviewed by the expert on the topic, and it's the wrong way around. So I might have more questions for you than you for me.
No, well, thank you. Let me start just by asking, how did your interest in Hong Kong begin, and why? What led you to get so involved?
Well, it was a bit of an accident, really. I have been to Hong Kong a couple of times. I played at the wonderful Clock and Flap Festival. Are you familiar with Clock and Flap, Ben?
Yes.
I played there with an electronic project a few years ago, and I went also to speak at a Manchester United partners conference. That's my personal relationship with Hong Kong from before. But what happened was in the middle of last year, I was loosely following what was going on in Hong Kong. And actually was due to play there with Mumford Sons at the end of 2019, but the date fell on the same day as some protests, so it ended up getting cancelled. But come mid 2020, when the British government announced the BNO scheme, I think that was July, and when Raab announced it. I thought brilliant. I was very in favor, but and I started digging into it, and I noticed that though the British government had announced the scheme, I wasn't seeing anyone talking about or concerning themselves with integration and assimilation and what that would be, which really worried me, because if at the time it was, a possibility of 3 million people plus their dependables coming, I was like, whoa, that's a huge migration that's possible. Obviously, it doesn't seem like the numbers will be that high now, but I was certainly concerned that there wasn't talk about the assimilation and integration of Hong Kongers, and there wasn't talk about how we were going to help Hong Kongers arrive here. And that quickly led me to you. I through my digging, came to Hong Kong Watch, and I think I called you quite soon after and said, what can be done, what's going on, and you introduced me to various Hong Kongers who had already arrived in the UK, and by some sort of accident of history, whereas the British borders were still open at the time, but the Taiwanese and Australian and Canadian borders were closed because of COVID. So Hong Kongers, you have to correct me if I get any of these details wrong, Ben, but Hong Kongers are already arriving. And so you introduced me to a few of the young Hong Kongers who'd been forced to flee, and they introduced me to more, and I started meeting them, hosting them, trying to sort of be a friend where I could. Some of them didn't know anyone and in London, and also a very difficult time to come to a country when it's completely dead and closed in terms of it was lockdown, and one of those that I met was Jim Wong, and wonderful man. He's become a great friend, really, I mean, sincerely, one of my closest friends. And together, well, I'll fast forward then to January. Over those 6 months or 7 months, there was still not much being said on assimilation and integration. And come January, I think the only other, or there might have been a few, but it was Krish Kandaya and UKHK Welcomes. Is that, am I getting it? Which was a Christian church-based organization Krish had set up. Absolutely brilliant, and the church, I'm glad to see, have really stepped up under Krish's leadership in welcoming Hong Kongers. But at that time, I was still very concerned. At the end of January, and the start of the BNO scheme was looming, and there were still very, very few, if any other, civil enterprises, civil society enterprises on focusing on Hong Kong. And so Jim and I were like, well, you know, this shouldn't really fall to a banjo player, but we should do something. And so we put Hong Kong Link Up together very quickly. And the sort of initial dream was, well, if we can help, you know, one other Hong Konger, then this is worth it. You know, this is it. This is a worthy enterprise. And actually, it's been hugely, it's really been gone what. It's got way outgrown our wildest dreams, and I think we had huge support. We've had I think we're now something like 3,500 people signing up and hundreds paired, and so it's been just really blessed. You know, it's wonderful. To see it like this, and growing like this, and we've had great help. Jenny's been helping us, and at starting up, we had a chap called Gavin Batty who's helping us a great deal, and Neil Jameson of the UK Welcomes Refugees, who has been guiding us, and he's also been doing great work on helping Hong Kongers integrate. And I should say, since then, as you know, and there's been many civil groups stepping up on the issue, on the topic, and in various ways. So actually, although our initial, or rather our main job is pairing Hong Kongers up with Brits, so that they can have, you know, it's like a buddy system. Actually, we've had a lot of Hong Kongers reaching out to us, not sure, looking for specific help that we can't give, but we can put them in the right direction. And Jim and Jenny have gone out their way to meet Hong Kongers who arrive, often who are alone and don't know anyone. It's a very daunting country to come to if you don't know the language. And so Jim and Jenny have been brilliant in that. It's just been really wonderful to see it, good things happening from it. So my story, yeah, that was kind of that's the whole, not just the beginning, that's kind of the whole story.
That's amazing, and it's incredible in the space of just over a year that you've gone from. I remember that phone call when we spoke in the summer of last year, and you said, "How can I help?" And here you have hundreds of people now contacting you. Could you say a bit more about how, sort of in practice, it works? Hong Kongers will contact you and say, "We'd like to take part in the buddy system." How do you then? What are the steps that go from there in terms of finding someone for them, and then what goes on in their relationship with their buddies that you've linked them up with?
Yeah, so we gather some details and information about Hong Kongers and about the Brits signing up. Enough information so that we can pair them appropriately where they are in their lives. So young families with young families, or maybe it's students with students, and also by location. It's been across the country and making sure that they, live near each other. And we pair everyone manually. We have to be quite careful to make sure there's a fair amount of security procedures for volunteers to go through, just to make sure we keep our clients safe. And so then once everyone, the sign-ups have gone through that process, Jenny and Jim pair them up together and we introduce them, and we sort of leave it to them. We check in on them to make sure they're doing okay. And it's a 3-month we encourage a sort of 3-month relationship to help them help the Hong Kongers get up on their feet.
That's absolutely brilliant. Can I ask you, either from observations of the pairing or just more generally your observations of Hong Kongers coming to the UK, what would you say are the positives of the BNO scheme a year on, and what would you say are some of the challenges that people face?
Well, the positives, one thing I've been very encouraged, and this was best summed up by Jim when we first met, he says, "This is the country of the freedom," as he told me. And what I realized in that is that really Hong Konger values are very similar to British values. They have the same sense of responsibility, self-responsibility, but also responsibility to their neighbors. And there's an eagerness to help each other and an eagerness to get involved in communities, the communities they arrive into, which has been wonderful to see. And the difficulties, I think, certainly younger Hong Kongers, there's some of them have been through quite a lot of trauma, and many have left their families behind to start a new life, and giving them the correct help has been difficult. And that's why actually the HK Arc is a great organization for that. So that's one thing we've noticed. I think that a lot of our pairings have been, I think we've appealed to a younger group of Hong Kongers than the demographic of the entire demographic that's arrived in the UK, and that's one of the trickier things we've seen.
That's that's really helpful, and I think it's always right to celebrate the positives and the successes, but to be aware of the challenges, and so that we can address them. Let's maybe just look a little bit at the situation in Hong Kong itself. Over the last few years, and particularly the last year since the national security law, we've seen a crackdown on pretty much every aspect of life. Demonstrators are no longer able to protest. The free press has closed or is closing. Education and academia is now under censorship and pressure, as is the judiciary. And possibly one of the sectors that's now being targeted or starting to be is the arts. We've seen, for example, the singer Denise Ho coming under pressure to cancel concerts, and new regulations regarding film censorship. What, as a musician yourself, someone in the arts, what does that mean, do you think, and how important is it alongside all the other areas where freedom has been dismantled?
Yeah, was it this month or last month that Denise Ho had her concert cancelled by the Hong Kong arts community.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it was also this month that Xi Jinping in the mainland was doing his cull of actors and artists who had incorrect political opinions, which is, I mean, it's classic far left communist government stuff. Same stuff was happening in the Soviet Union, and it's just, I guess it's surface level it's you know, it's all the freedoms that we take for granted here are being hacked away at. And I can't say I'm really surprised. It's even more scary. You'll have to fill me in here, but I understand that the language of Cantonese itself is being banned banned on the mainland in certain parts, and it's a complete sweep of you know, total clamping down of all these freedoms and of expression, you know, not just music but the language itself. I mean, this is it's yeah, as I said, it's shocking but also not surprising simultaneously. And we take our freedoms for granted here, I think, in the West, but you know, freedom when you see it stripped away. And the Hong Kongers, you're not allowed to play music, not allowed to speak the language, some of them can't see their families. I mean, yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've talked a bit there about freedom, but could you say maybe a little more about what freedom means to you?
As I say, freedom. I think you perhaps don't realize what it is until it's gone. And some of my Hong Konger friends here in the UK are quite literally too scared to contact their families back home in case that indicts them or puts them in a difficult situation. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. We talk here about freedom of expression and freedom to vote and you know, democracy, these kind of freedoms, but in Hong Kong, and we're way beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Would you agree with many Hong Kongers have said over the last couple of years that Hong Kong represents or represented, given that the freedoms now have been lost, represented a front line in the sort of fight for freedom around the world? Would you agree with that? And if so, what can those of us who do enjoy freedom still do, other than you know, in addition to welcoming Hong Kongers who need to get out?
Yeah, absolutely. Hong Kong's one of many front lines on that issue. And what can we do? Well, I thought about that a lot, particularly last year, and the answer to that question for me was ended up being Hong Kong Link Up, and because it's very frustrating, particularly when you're on the other side of the world, to know what to do to help, and often one can't do on a political level. I suppose email your MPs and keep pushing them on the issue to try and you know, make them encourage the Foreign Office to do whatever they can to stand up to the tyranny that is the CCP. But on a practical level, it's these people who are fleeing because they haven't got their freedoms. Let's help them get up on their 2 feet, and let's help them start their new lives here in our countries. That's the kind of, that was the answer anyway to that question that I was asking myself last year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just coming back to the arts in general, and also sort of Hong Kong identity and culture and language, as you mentioned. I know you've been involved in thinking about how those can be kept alive outside Hong Kong. What Hong Kongers, now they're here in the UK or in other parts of the world, can do around protecting and promoting Hong Kong identity and culture and the arts. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is one thing I'm hoping to do is help the Hong Kongers who have arrived to preserve their culture, not just because, largely because it's being eradicated back in Hong Kong, but also it's the culture, the great culture of Hong Kong is, and kind of presenting it to Brits is a way for them to kind of get their heads around what's going on over there. China can be, and Chinese related issues can be very daunting, I think, for Brits, because the language is so alien. We're not really taught about the history in school. Even trying to get into the history it's quite difficult to penetrate. So I'm hoping to launch a production entity company to help Hong Kongers with various cultural programs, be they music events, film festivals. Not quite sure exactly what, and it's tying in with Uyghur work, which I've spoken to you about, and I'm hoping that this side of Christmas we can do a Uyghur concert as well. Not confirmed, but that's the Uyghur issues, another similar situation. There's been a fair amount of press on the Uyghurs, but for the British public, it's quite hard to get one's head around the Uyghur issue, because we have such little understanding of the region. And there are, I think, only 500 Uyghurs in the UK. So trying to put on sort of cultural events is, I think, a way of inviting people into that world and humanizing it. So it's not just ink on paper; it's a real thing that they can interact with, and we can see the important. It sort of help us will realize how important it is for us to keep these things alive, and not least to protect as well people who are having their lives completely wiped.
Absolutely, and it's also really important to sort of strengthen the links between the two, between Hong Kongers and Uyghurs, and indeed Tibetans and others in China, because ultimately it's all part of the same picture of the Chinese Communist Party's repression of everyone. Agreed. Yeah. Can I ask one penultimate question, and then we'll come to the final question? It's when you look at causes around the world, there are people from the arts, musicians, film stars, actors, etc., who've been identified with different causes around the world. But there aren't very many in the arts who are speaking up for either for Hong Kong or on China as a whole. And of course, Hollywood the Chinese Communist Party has had quite a hold on Hollywood and on other parts of the entertainment industry. Do you feel a bit of a lone voice taking up this issue, or do you feel that there are others in the same sector who are supportive?
I can see it's very difficult for people in Hollywood to talk on China, and generally, Hollywood. China's such a big market for Hollywood. If you look at what happened with the actor John Cena, he had to retract, had to apologize for calling Taiwan a country, and I don't know what happened behind the scenes there, but. I see that as evidence of the power of China in Hollywood, and I think it's a money thing. I haven't thought too much about. I'm sure other artists care about Hong Kong and China, and I can't speak for them. I don't know exactly, but yeah.
Understood. Well, my last question, there'll be hopefully many Hong Kongers watching this, many of whom have come to the UK. They may be in other parts of the world. There may be some still in Hong Kong who follow this, and it takes some courage to do so now, given the situation in Hong Kong. But what would be your message to people watching this?
Message to Hong Kongers is you're very welcome in the United Kingdom, and organizations, some of which I've mentioned in this interview, are geared up and ready to help you start new lives. And so we look forward to meeting you.
Brilliant. Well, Winston Marshall, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for all you're doing with Hong Kong Link Up.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks a lot.